In 695 AD, a Byzantine emperor was overthrown, had his nose cut off to prevent him from ever ruling again, and was sent into exile. In 705 AD, that same man appeared before the walls of Constantinople at the head of a Bulgarian and Slavic army, entered the city through a forgotten drainage tunnel, seized the throne, and ruled for another 6 years. The mutilation that was supposed to make him permanently ineligible for power became, instead, the symbol by which history remembers him. Justinian II Rhinotmetos, Justinian the Slit-Nosed. He replaced his missing nose with a gold prosthetic. He put his own face on the coins of the empire, looking directly at the viewer, the first emperor in decades to do so. He convened councils, built churches, conducted military campaigns, and executed his enemies with a thoroughness that suggests he had been composing lists during the 10 years he spent in exile. He was, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary personalities in Byzantine history, a man of genuine administrative talent, implacable personal vengeance, political ruthlessness, and a religious sincerity that coexisted with all of the above in ways that Byzantine culture seemed to find perfectly natural. He was also overthrown twice and killed in the end by the same forces that had exiled him the first time, his head displayed on a pike, his son murdered before him, his dynasty extinguished. His life traces the full arc of Byzantine political tragedy, rise, achievement, catastrophe, impossible return, and final destruction. There is no other story quite like it in the history of the empire. The first reign, ambition without patience. Justinian II came to the throne in 685 at the age of approximately 16, the son of Constantine IV and the last emperor of the Heraclian dynasty that had ruled Byzantium since 610. He inherited an empire that had survived the most severe crises of the 7th century, the Arab conquests that had stripped away Egypt, Syria, and Palestine, the repeated Arab sieges of Constantinople, and had reached a kind of exhausted stability under his father's cautious management. Justinian II was not interested in cautious management. His first decade in power was marked by genuine achievement alongside the personal qualities that would eventually destroy him. He negotiated a successful peace with the Arab Caliphate in 685, obtaining favorable terms that included tribute and the partition of revenues from Cyprus, Armenia, and Iberia. He conducted successful campaigns against Slavic and Bulgarian populations in the Balkans, forcibly relocating large numbers of Slavic settlers from Thrace to Anatolia, a massive population transfer designed to deny the Arabs a potential fifth column and to strengthen the agricultural and military base of the empire's core territories. The operation was administratively complex and militarily successful, demonstrating organizational abilities that his later behavior would repeatedly obscure. He convened the Quinisext Council in 691 to 692, also called the Council in Trullo, which addressed a wide range of disciplinary and liturgical questions for the Eastern Church with a comprehensiveness that had not been attempted since the Second Ecumenical Council of 381. The council's canons regulated the conduct of clergy, defined the boundaries of acceptable religious art, and addressed dozens of practical questions of church discipline. Pope Sergius I refused to sign the council's acts, objecting to several canons that diverged from Roman practice. Justinian reportedly attempted to have the Pope arrested and brought to Constantinople, an act of imperial overreach that the soldiers sent to execute it refused to carry out, the Roman militia having made clear they would not permit it. The tax policy that accompanied these achievements was the proximate cause of his first fall. He appointed two officials, the eunuch Stephen and the monk Theoptistus, to manage the fiscal administration of the empire with a mandate to maximize revenues. Their methods were, by contemporary account, extortionate to the point of provoking genuine hardship across multiple provinces. The combination of punitive taxation, the humiliation of the Pope, and the personal abrasiveness that seems to have characterized Justinian's treatment of everyone who worked with or for him generated a coalition of opposition that eventually acted. The cutting and the exile. In 695, a military revolt led by the general Leontios seized power in Constantinople. Justinian II was brought before the assembled population of the Hippodrome, the traditional venue for public political theater in Byzantine life, and subjected to a ritual humiliation that included having his nose cut off and his tongue slit. The mutilations were designed to make him permanently ineligible for imperial rule. Byzantine political tradition held that a man with a physically imperfect body could not be emperor, a convention rooted in the idea that the emperor's body was a symbol of the empire's integrity. He was then exiled to Kherson, a Byzantine outpost on the Crimean peninsula, remote, cold, and far enough from Constantinople to make any return attempt seem impossible. The exile was intended to be permanent. The mutilation was intended to guarantee it. The exilers did not sufficiently account for what 10 years of exile, cold, and humiliation would do to a man of Justinian II's particular temperament and intelligence. In Kherson, Justinian was not idle. He made contact with the Khagan of the Khazars, the Turkish-speaking semi-nomadic empire that controlled the steppes north of the Black Sea, and married the Khagan's sister, whom he renamed Theodora. The marriage gave him a connection to a major military power and, eventually, a refuge when Cherson's population, fearing reprisals from Constantinople, attempted to hand him over to the reigning emperor. He escaped and made his way to Bulgaria, where Khan Tervel received him. The return. Through the tunnel and onto the throne. The return of Justinian II to Constantinople in 705 is one of the most dramatic episodes in Byzantine history, and one of the most practically improbable. He had a Bulgarian army, Tervel's support, and the agreement that Tervel would receive the title of Caesar, the second highest title in the Byzantine hierarchy, and significant territorial concessions in return for military assistance. What he did not have was any obvious way to get inside Constantinople's walls. The Theodosian walls were, as they had been for nearly 3 centuries, essentially impregnable to direct assault by any army that lacked the specific technical advantages to breach them. Justinian's Bulgarian force could threaten the suburbs and the food supply, it could not take the city. The solution he found was not military but architectural, a disused water pipe or drainage conduit. The sources vary on the precise nature of the passage that ran beneath the walls. Justinian, with a small group of followers, crawled through this tunnel and emerged inside the city. What happened next moved faster than organized resistance could form. Justinian and his group made contact with supporters inside the city, officials, military men, and others who had reason to prefer his return to the current regime. And the gates were opened to the Bulgarian army before the defenders could consolidate. The city fell to the combination of internal subversion and external pressure, which is how Constantinople fell to the one attacker who knew it from the inside. The Emperor Tiberios III, who had been ruling since 698, was captured. The former Emperor Leontios, who had deposed Justinian in 695 and been himself overthrown by Tiberios, was also in custody. Justinian had both men brought before him and held down at his feet while he watched the chariot races in the Hippodrome, a deliberate theatrical recreation of his own humiliation 10 years earlier, with the roles reversed. Then he had both men executed by strangulation. The executions were the beginning of a systematic settling of accounts that would occupy much of his second reign. The second reign, revenge as policy. The 6 years of Justinian II's second reign, 705 to 711, are dominated in the sources by the executions, mutilations, and punishments he inflicted on everyone he held responsible for his exile, directly or indirectly. The former Emperor Leontios and Tiberios were only the most prominent. Senior officials who had served under the interim regimes, military commanders who had not supported his return, the population of Kherson which had attempted to betray him. All faced consequences ranging from dismissal to death to the same mutilations that had been applied to him. The Chersonites fared particularly badly. Justinian sent a punitive expedition to the city in 710, with orders of notable severity: the population was to be killed, the city burned. The expedition carried out the first part of the mandate and was carrying out the second when a storm destroyed most of the fleet. Justinian sent a second expedition. The survivors of the first expedition, returning to find Constantinople under siege by the second revolt that would end his life, chose to join the revolt instead of returning to Kherson. The military campaigns of his second reign had mixed results. The campaign against Kherson succeeded, at enormous cost. Relations with Bulgaria deteriorated after Justinian attempted to renege on the concessions he had promised Tervel in return for his help. A decision that combined ingratitude with strategic incompetence, since it converted his most important military patron into an enemy. The Arab frontier was managed with less success than in his first reign, partly because the systematic purge of experienced officials and commanders had removed institutional knowledge along with political opposition. His religious policy in the second reign had some genuinely significant moments. He brought Pope Constantine to Constantinople in 710 to 711. The first pope to visit Constantinople since Martin I in the 7th century, and received him with extraordinary honors, throwing himself at the pope's feet, a gesture of imperial humility that Byzantine court protocol normally reserved for God. The meeting resolved some of the outstanding disputes from the Quinisext Council and produced a degree of Byzantine-Roman rapprochement that his father and grandfather had not achieved. He was capable of statesmanship. It appeared in intervals between the executions. The gold nose and the coins. The gold prosthetic nose that Justinian II wore after his mutilation is mentioned in several sources and has been the subject of considerable scholarly attention, primarily because of what it represents about Byzantine ideas of imperial legitimacy and bodily integrity. Byzantine tradition held, as noted, that physical imperfection disqualified a man from imperial rule. This tradition had been the basis of the mutilations themselves. By cutting off Justinian's nose and slitting his tongue, the conspirators of 695 were applying an established legal and cultural principle. Justinian's response was to challenge the principle directly. The gold nose was not concealment but display, a prosthetic made of the most prestigious material available, worn openly, converting the mark of disqualification into an assertion of continued legitimacy. He was saying, in the most visible possible way, that the traditional rule did not apply to him, that his claim to the throne was not contingent on physical perfection, that his legitimacy rested on something else, hereditary right, divine favor, the simple fact of his survival and return. The coins tell the same story. Justinian II was the first Byzantine emperor in generations to place his own portrait, facing the viewer directly, in the manner of the classical imperial tradition. On the gold coinage. Earlier emperors had used Christ's image or frontal imperial portraits that emphasized dignity over individuality. Justinian's coins from his second reign show a specific face, the gold nose visible, the expression direct, the imperial insignia unmistakable. He put his mutilated self on the money of the empire, as a statement about what the empire was and who was running it. On the reverse of many of his coins, he placed the image of Christ. Not the distant, symbolic Christ of earlier Byzantine coinage, but a more individualized image that medieval art historians call Christ Pantocrator, the Almighty. The pairing of the emperor's damaged face with Christ's transcendent authority was a precise theological statement. Justinian II ruled not because of physical perfection but because of divine mandate. The body could be mutilated, the mandate could not. The end, Anastasius and the final fall. The second revolt that ended Justinian II's life and dynasty came from the same sources as the first, military commanders in the provinces, exhausted by a regime that combined punitive taxation, systematic purges, and strategic failures with an emperor who regarded every obstacle as evidence of personal betrayal. The revolt began in Kherson, ironically, the city he had tried to destroy, and was led by a man who had been sent there as one of his officials and found common cause with the surviving population. The rebels proclaimed a new emperor, Philippicus Bardanes, and marched on Constantinople. Justinian moved to meet them with whatever forces he could assemble, which were insufficient. The army that was supposed to defend him defected instead. He was captured and killed in November 711, 11 years after his impossible return, and his head was sent to Rome and to Ravenna as confirmation of the regime change. His son Tiberios, whom he had made co-emperor and whose existence represented the continuation of the Heraclean dynasty, was killed at the same time, murdered, by some accounts, while taking refuge at the altar of a church. The dynasty that had ruled Byzantium for a century ended in those two deaths. The period that followed. The 20 years of military anarchy between 711 and 717, during which 6 emperors rose and fell before Leo III established a new stable dynasty, is sometimes called the Second Dark Age of Byzantium, and its beginning was the death of Justinian II. What the story means. Justinian II Rhinotmetos is one of the hardest figures in Byzantine history to evaluate simply, because he embodies the contradictions of Byzantine political culture at their most extreme. He was capable of genuine administrative achievement, the Quinisext Council, the Arab peace, the population transfers, and of personal behavior that made sustained achievement impossible. He was sincerely religious and systematically brutal. He was intelligent enough to return from impossible exile and not intelligent enough to consolidate the second chance he had fought his way back to. The gold nose is the right image for him. The attempt to convert damage into dignity, the refusal to accept the terms that others had imposed on his existence, the insistence that what had been done to him did not define what he was. In that refusal there is something genuinely admirable. In the executions and the Sher-Sun expedition and the alienation of Tervel and the destruction of his own regime, there is the evidence that the refusal, untempered by any capacity for political prudence, was also a kind of death wish. The will to return so strong that it crowded out the will to survive the return. Byzantine history is full of emperors who were overthrown. He is the only one who came back. That alone would be enough to remember him. The gold nose, the tunnel under the walls, the hippodrome throne with his enemies at his feet, the coins with Christ on the back and a mutilated face on the front, these are images that do not fade easily. History remembers the extraordinary, and Justinian II was, in his way, entirely extraordinary.